What's going on, everybody? The regularly scheduled JaAR will be here, we promise, so don't run away yet. But there wasn't a ton that we had to say about this particular story. There will be some, and we'll have that at the end. But what we wanted to do was, when we were reading this story to prep for reviewing it in front of all of you and with all of you, we realized that the voices that I do to try to make it more immersive and etc. were hitting a little bit different this week than usual. And so we wanted to make sure to share it with all of you so that you would see a little bit of what we're dealing with. So
behind the curtain.
Yeah, so we hope that you enjoy, and if this is something that you want to see more of, maybe let us know. Please be kind. This is the first time I've tried to do a voice acty thing. But obviously I'd love constructive criticism and feedback. Always welcome. And yeah, we would obviously love it then if you would stay along until after the story is done to join in on the discussion. And if you want to follow along with the words yourself, the top link in the description down below, as always, will take you to the story. And we hope you enjoy. At Any Cost by Nick Davidson. Ob Nixilis is having a bad day. Things had been going so well. He'd seized the power of the relocated Colony Heart, and with it forged a connection to the raw mana of Zendikar. He was finally ready to tap into Zendikar's Hedron network and restore his Planeswalker spark. And then, disaster struck, in the form of the elf Planeswalker Nissa Ravain. Nissa took Colony Heart from the demon would-be Planeswalker, repaired her own connection with Zendikar, and collapsed tons of rock and soil on him. It was a setback, but Ob Nixilis had not gotten this far by giving up. Pain. A modest upgrade to the oblivion I'd been expecting. It could only mean one thing. She left me alive. I laughed. Nothing else to do, really. My body was broken in a dozen places by the collapse of the cavern, and I was thoroughly pinned in place. The acts of laughing sent waves of radiant agony throughout my body, and I used the pain to diagnose my injuries. They were severe, but I would heal. I was breathing. That was nice. Shallow, pained breaths, with stone and sand pressing down on me from above. But I was clearly getting enough fresh air to keep me conscious. That implied that I wasn't that far from the surface. Or perhaps I was just near enough to an air pocket that would run out soon. None of the options were terribly good, but I was alive. Defeat, if you survive it, should mean time for reflection. Unearned arrogance had been the death of countless would-be warlords. After all, how many did I cut down for their hubris over the millennia? Here, buried alive on the heels of a crushing loss, I decided I would take the opportunity I had been given. It had been a very good plan. Synchronize the Hedron network with Colony Heart, and use it to channel enough planar energy through my body to reignite my spark. There had been a decent chance it would have killed me, yes, but I was well past that being a concern by now. And yes, I knew that as of some decades ago, being a Planeswalker didn't mean what it used to. So much the better, really. The idea that there were countless planes out there that had lost their godlike protectors and champions. Imagine the chaos that the mending had wrought on the multiverse. Chaos like that needs to be quelled. Chaos like that needs to be brought to heel. And I am the perfect person for the task. The plan was good, but the plan had failed. The idea that some planeswalker other than Nahiri would actually want to save this horrible plane had really not factored highly into my thought process. I had contingencies in place for her, but I admit I wasn't prepared for an insane Jiraga who could draw upon the heart of a dying world, showing up hours before my ritual would have been complete, upending a century's worth of work, and burying me alive. I was annoyed. There was a bigger problem, and it was that all of my troops were in one valley, so to speak. I didn't know how long Zendikar had before the Eldrazi would finish destroying the plane, and even accounting for what I had learned, I didn't have another half-century to recreate my work. At the rate things were progressing, the plane would be irreparably broken within the year. Not to mention that there wasn't another power source like Kalni Heart left on the plane. Well, there was one, but even I wasn't that desperate. Not yet. I ran down my options. Option 1, I tried to replicate my work. Complication, the Eldrazi will almost certainly destroy the plane, with me on it, long before I succeed. Maybe I'd get extraordinarily lucky, and stumble upon another power source. But only fools plan on luck, and I didn't intend to start now. Option 2, I go after the elf, and take the heart back. Complication, taking on a planeswalker in my current state seems like pretty poor odds, especially one who has Kalni Heart at her disposal. Especially one who already handed me a defeat when I was at full strength. There's no honor or dignity in a futile charge against a superior foe, despite what I may have told a general or two whom I needed to do the tactically expedient thing. Option 3. Team up with a greater power. Oh, it's never my first choice, but sometimes it's the only way. I had studied the Eldrazi almost as thoroughly as I'd studied the Hedrons. While they couldn't be bargained with, they had shown themselves willing to work through allies. Old Kalidas learned that the hard way, and I would certainly relish helping them bring this world to ashes and end. But then what? They have no sense of gratitude, no sense of fairness. The idea that they would reward me in any way would be impossibly alien to them. A Pyrrhic victory is merely the most palatable kind of defeat. Time. I needed more time. The solution hit me, and I laughed again. Uproarious, oblivious to the pain. I laughed until I wept molten tears. After all these centuries, nothing amuses me like irony. There was actually one way that I could buy myself enough time to recreate my work. I was going to have to save Zendikar. First things first. Buried alive. I wasn't sure precisely how much time had passed. I was far from healed, but when you're counting down to the end of the world, you can cut corners sometimes. I reached out to the area around me and attempted to extinguish the nearby life, drawing the energy for myself. A simple feat of magic, and somewhat of a specialty. But when I reached out, nothing. I was buried in Balaged, a place stripped of all life by Ulamog. There wasn't even an insect, a worm, a blade of grass to drain for strength. This time, I found the irony less amusing. I struggled for what must have been hours before I finally managed to shift the stones above me. While doing so, I imagined 1,000 pleasing ways to end the elf's miserable existence. The entire process of escape took days. A handful of the ideas held promise. From there, the next step was to excavate what I could of my Hedron network. Even with a bare handful of Hedrons, I could effectively construct a leyline compass, something that would give me a sense of the distribution of energy on what was left of the plane. If there was going to be a defense of Zendikar, the JaAR would be at the center of it, drawing on the power of Kalni Heart, and that was something I could track. The work was slow, and it gave me plenty of time to think. Ulamog's spawn were an unrelenting, unthinking force, and the various monstrosities that commanded them wielded sheer power of the sort that I had rarely seen. Still, it was the unthinking aspect of their nature that provided the opportunity. All it would take would be a properly coordinated force of sufficient might and an insufficient sense of self-preservation to give me an opportunity to strike at the head. I was sure the Zendikari were busy scrounging up such a force, even if I had no intention of leading it. The Titans had been trapped for a very long time, and they could be contained again. I didn't need them destroyed or even permanently incapacitated. Quite the contrary, I was more than pleased to give the monsters the feast they deserved. I just didn't intend to be a corpse. I had spent quite some time deciphering exactly what Nahiri had done to me. And now I was going to do the same thing to Ulamog. Use a Hedron to bind an extraplanar threat and save Zendikar. I wondered if Nahiri would be pleased or disgusted that I was the one doing her work for now. I found both options hilarious. I clawed through the dust for more than a day before I found what I was looking for. A Hedron no larger than my head, intricately carved and alive with power. It was the keystone in the Hedron network I had created. Just the thing to use to bind Ulamog and diminish its power. I looked upon it again with some amount of awe. There was room in my loathing of Nahiri to admire her genius. To create something of such power and contain that power in an object that could survive for millennia or more. If Nahiri had not returned to help forestall Zendikar's destruction, it almost certainly meant she was dead. It made me a little sad, truly, that I would never get the chance to face her again. Well, that had been enough sentiment to last me another decade. Or, more likely, for the rest of my life. I ran a pulse of magic through two of the larger Hedrons in my network, and they floated up above the sand, turning themselves slowly until they found alignment. From there, I activated the keystone and moved it slowly around the pair, feeling the push and pull of energy from the stones. Lithomancy was a subtle art, and though I knew I had only scratched the surface of it, it still offered me a versatility of magic that I had not known before. The basic function of a Hedron is to redirect energy, but that simple function can be used to empower, summon, imprison, or destroy. An image of weight, of gravity and distance played out in my mind and body, and I strained to make sense of it. The location of the elf was easy enough to divine. Empowered by the heart, she stood out like the sun. But there was something else. A channeling of mana that seemed both abhorrent and familiar. They were close together. Whatever it was likely where the Zendikari would make their last stand. Tazim. Seagate, if memory served. A lovely place for a slaughter. I unfurled my wings. Marvelous things, really, and I hadn't made much use of them. They made travel slightly more bearable, and made moving between Zendikar's continents much less of a chore. The skies offered a taste of freedom, but also served as a bitter reminder of what I had lost. The freedom of the skies is a vanishing mote of dust in the face of the freedom that the multiverse once offered me. On the other hand, you don't see a lot of demons on boats, and it turns out there are some very good reasons for that. I flew along the coasts, preferring to avoid flying over open water, except as needed to reach Tazim. The skies were largely devoid of life. With a keen eye, you could pick out some of Ulamog's floating spawn, but they were uninterested in me, and I in them. Birds were rare. Angels, thankfully, were all but gone. When the Eldrazi rose, the angels fought. Adorable, really. Not awful tacticians, if I'm being fair, but they labored under the misconception that it was a battle that they could win. The angels fought, and mostly, they died. Very rarely, you'd see one of Emrakul's lone spawn floating about, doing whatever her spawn do. But for the most part, the skies were mine. An open sky, a bright sun shining down on me, peaceful clouds drifting in the wind. And I felt them all as an oppressive weight, a confinement. That distant horizon was a claustrophobic nightmare. But soon, that horizon would be gone. And one way or another, so would I. As I covered the miles on my approach to Seagate, it was clear that I was heading to the right place. On one side, there was endless wastes. Ulamog himself had carved a path to this place, leaving silence and dust in his wake. On the other, a ragged supply caravan wound its way through Tazim. Refugees and fighters, though you couldn't really tell the difference between them, were swarming to the wall. The last stand of Zendikar was already underway. I could hear the roar of battle from miles away. Such a beautiful thing, but it was nothing compared to what I saw when I crested the wall. Armies clashing, Spawn and Zendikari slaughtered by the thousands, and rising above it all, Ulamog. Trapped in an enormous Hedron network. I needed a moment to take it all in. I couldn't keep the grin off my face. The network was huge. The Zendikari had accomplished with brute force what had taken me decades to complete through care and subtlety. By using the gigantic structural hedrons, they were able to tap into the energy of the entire plane. My work with Khalni Hart was essentially a scale model of what they had done. The alignment was rough and amateurish, even by my dabbler's standards, but it was stable. Only a fool plans on luck, but it's a greater fool who fails to take advantage of it. Option 1 was back on the table. I found a good vantage point to study the network, gently displacing the core sentries who'd been using it as a lookout station. The network was straining to contain Ulamog, but the Titan was starting to weaken as well. I was impressed. The Zendikari might have actually been able to kill it. Full marks for effort and inventiveness. But it was time to add a minor wrinkle to that plan. I flew up, high up above the fray. Core on their kite sails spotted me at this point, but didn't engage. Their attention was focused on holding back the spawn and relaying information to the battle below. The Keystone Hedron trailed behind me, and it began to react to the network's incredible energy. Its runes glowed with a violent light, overwhelmed by the ley line flow. I willed it into place, locked it into a harmonic point above the ring's precise center. It began to spin, a vortex of energy forming that sent a numbing electrical charge throughout my body. I faltered in the sky for a moment. My heart was pounding, and I could scarcely breathe. I had waited so long for this. So very long. I spoke 3 words. In that moment, everything began anew. The energy overwhelmed my senses. My vision flared to white, and I couldn't sense my body. The power burned through me, a rushing torrent of agony and perfection. And deep within my core, first as a glimmer and then as a blazing flame, my spark returned. The multiverse stretched out before me once more. I could feel the worlds, countless worlds, familiar and new, splayed out on an infinite canvas of realities. I felt them as pinpricks of light, beacons of power in the distance. The dream I'd had for millennia was finally at hand. I could leave this terrible place. I started to fade away to anywhere but here. No, I wasn't done here. Not yet. I tore myself out of the mana stream, power coursing through me. A snap of my fingers, and one of the structural hedrons fell out of alignment. The sheer force of the ley lines held it in place for a moment longer, but then, achingly slowly, it tumbled to the world below. There were screams of terror and disbelief. Ulamog thrashed, and the rest of the network crumbled. And down, so far down below me, I caught sight of her. The little elf. She had to know what was happening. She had to have felt it in her bones. Yes. There. She looked up at me, a look composed of shock and utter despair. That was a nice start, but I was far from done. One by one, I felt my connections to my old conquered worlds reappear. Not all of them, but enough. It had been so long. I let loose an enormous bolt of withering annihilation into the armies below, cutting off their retreat and forcing them back into Ulamog's path. The Zendikari were dying. Hundreds each second, and I could taste each life as it was snuffed out. Crisp, juicy, and sweet. A pocket of order was forming in the ranks below. A few planeswalkers were desperately trying to organize a retreat. Not that there was anywhere meaningful for them to go. Head swimming with power, I wanted nothing more than to swoop down there and end them all. And I would. But I caught myself. Not yet. Not yet. There was one last thing I needed to do first. Deep beneath the surface, it was already beginning to stir. I whispered to it, heedless of distance. I dared not focus my mind too directly on it. Reality recoiled and splintered merely from my thoughts approaching. But the power was there, and power spoke to power. It did not have a consciousness, not in any sense I could describe, but it had a will, and that will wanted nothing more than to be given purpose. I laughed. I had not felt joy like this before. Not ever. No triumph, no glory was greater than this. Beings of power. Beings of power want to be called. With my spark reignited, it was the easiest thing in the world. One more word. One little word was all it took. The world shook as I said it. The doom of Zendikar was here at last. I reached out to the south and grasped it. awakened it fully with the sheer force of my will. Mine would be the last word for this wretched plane, and I shouted it from the center of my soul. Rise! And so, after that, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. Now, that you just watched is something completely new and different, but we gave it a try, and if for whatever reason you skipped that part, or you didn't hear me, or you don't remember, today we are reviewing At Any Cost by Nick Davidson. The first thing I actually wanted to say was about Nick Davidson. Nick Davidson is not one of the... Well, actually, sorry. I went into the full review itself. It was going to be a positive thing. Please don't think it's bad, I promise. But our quick review at the top, if you did skip that portion, I guess, I don't know if the quick review is really necessary. You just listened to the whole thing. But my quick review is I really liked the story a lot. I thought it was awesome. But usually we give that quick review so that if people want to go read it for themselves, but we kind of just forced you into that, didn't we? So if you made it this far, thanks. But yeah, I guess if you skipped ahead and you do still want to go read that story, we both really enjoyed it, and we think it's worth your time. So again, top link in the description down below will take you to that story. But again, if you just read the whole thing or listened to the whole thing along with us, thank you.
Yeah.
As I said, we would love your feedback on that, but onto the full review itself. So, the first thing I wanted to say, again, positive thing about Nick Davidson. Nick Davidson was not one of the authors from this period of time that I had super fond memories of. And that's not to say I had bad memories, it's that I had no memories.
Right.
And this one was really good.
Yeah.
Just really good. And I have thoughts as to why. One of which is why I think the aspect of us wanting to have me show off my style of reading it was because it was from a first-person perspective.
Right.
That is rare. Because, like, it's usually a third-person omnipotent or first-person omnipotent type of perspective, typically, especially because they jump around a lot between different perspectives.
Yeah.
We talked about that in last week's story. We've talked about that many, many times. But I feel like it's been a long time. Maybe it's just with how we're, like, what order we're reading these stories in terms of, like, reviewing Strixhaven and then back to Battle for Zendikar stuff. But I feel like it's been a long time since we've read a good first-person story like this.
Yeah.
And it just, I think Nick Davidson did an incredible job of, like, getting you inside of the head of a demon.
Right.
You know, and you made a point about his personality of, like, not caring.
I just thought that maybe, like, the way that you read it was, like, so passionate, and I almost feel like he would be more, like, more apathetic, or at least more, like, seeming to be apathetic about it.
And that's why I was going to say, I think that's why he comes across as so funny in the first portion of this story, maybe like the first half to 3/4 of it, is because he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a single damn about it at all. He's a demon. So, like, that stuff doesn't matter to him.
But you made a good point when I said that, to say, yeah, but this is his revenge.
Right, well, because you were referring to, like, him stalking Nissa or seeing Nissa or whatever. So that particular aspect of it, or you mean the entirety of the situation?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, that the overall mood of what he was saying would be a little bit more careless. But I think you make a good point that, you know, the beginning part of the story was so funny because of that lack of caring.
Right.
And then the later part of the story was like, okay, now I'm fucking mad. You know? So, yeah. No, I changed my mind when you responded to what I said.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I also, oh God, I so wanted to talk about the juxtaposition. I mean, again, Ob Nixilis is a demon. And yet, genuinely, for the first 3/4 of the story, with how comical it is, until he says, like, I unfurled my wings...
You kind of forget.
Yeah. You really do. I mean, there's the joke about, like, demons don't go on boats, and there's a reason for that. Hilarious, by the way.
Right.
Crying molten tears.
Right.
Great.
Stupid. But great.
Right. But until he, like, unfurls his wings and you get to that latter part of the story, like Amy said, you kind of forget, and that's a good thing, but it's also, like...
Because in those moments, you're identifying with him as well, you know?
But it's like, you get the opportunity to forget.
Right.
And then they slap you in the face with it at the end of this. Because you're sitting here and you're like, this is hilarious. This is light and fun and great. And then, oh, by the way, I just drop a Hedron out of the sky. Hundreds are dying every second. And it again, talk about a snap.
I just don't care. I'm having a grand old day.
But talk about a snap, right? Him snapping and dropping that Hedron and the description of what's happening to the Zendikari people. If you were here for our review of last week's story, or if you read last week's story, you were in the trenches with the Zendikari people, or even 2 weeks ago, I guess, as well, when the actual fighting was occurring in the story from 2 weeks ago. But those are people that you've read about, that you're comfortable and familiar with. Hell, even if you haven't read these stories, that contingent of planeswalkers that he's talking about, that like try to rally a retreat even though there's no place for them to go, that's Gideon and Nissa and Jace down there.
Right.
He calls them a contingent of planeswalkers, but for us reading the story, that's heartbreaking.
Right. Those are the characters that we know, that we have gotten a lot of character development on. And love. And he is a character that we've gotten significantly less character development with.
Yeah.
And we don't love him. And he's a demon.
It almost makes, like, it's not, right? But it almost makes you feel like you're, like, cheating, right? Because you're like reading this story and it's super funny, right? So you're like, wow, this guy's hilarious. I love this guy. And by that, I don't necessarily mean Nick Davidson, although that counts. But I mean, in this case, I mean Ob Nixilis. And then you get to the end and you're like, holy crap, this dude's kind of a bastard. Like, you know, because you're reading about, like, oh, he wants to get his revenge on Nissa, but he's super funny.
Right.
And then you get to the later part of the story and you're like, oh, he's getting his revenge on Nissa.
Yeah.
Like, that's Nissa down there.
It's such like a personality switch.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. And I mean, again, is that the dichotomy of his human side versus his demon side? Or, you know, is that just, that's what demons are? They are manipulative, right? They manipulate you into, maybe this is devils, am I stupid? Is demons, devils, do they all make you, like, sign contracts and, like, get into servitude with them or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so.
But then, well, I mean, like, you know, yeah. So I think that may be more devils than demons, but regardless, the fact that he's so comical. Because the other thing is, this whole story is Ob Nixilis telling you a story, right? Because it's all past tense. It's all like, and then this happened, and then I did this, and then this happened. So you could very well just be, like, this story could be you sitting in a bar and this burly, magma-filled demon walks in and sits down and tells you a story.
I could go to a bar that demon just, you know, goes to.
Like you do.
Yeah.
Who among us has not walked into an old-timey tavern, sat next to a demon with magma boiling in through his veins, and had a, you know, quick, light conversation?
Yeah.
Anyway.
And said, you are so funny. That is burning me.
And that's what I'm saying, right? It's so familiar of an interaction that you're not having.
Right.
That when he, like, goes from that moment of, like, just chatting with you about his life to, oh, by the way, I snuffed out hundreds of lives in seconds.
Yeah. It's almost like...
At the whim, because I already did it. I had already done what I wanted to do. I already got my spark back. I could have left, and then I was like, nah, I got one more thing to do. And then he comes back, he breaks Ulamog out, sees hundreds of people die, notes that hundreds of people are dying, and then he goes, you know what? There needs to be more. And so if you have not seen or you don't know what's coming next, I guess I won't spoil it for you, but it's good. And what a cool way to end it. Sorry, go ahead.
It's almost like the audience whom he's telling the story to is his demon friends.
Sure. Like I said, it's very familiar, right? Yeah. It's a very familiar tone to this conversation.
Right. So it's like the audience is somebody that he knows, is around all the time, cares about, and also gets him.
Yeah.
You know, understands that dichotomy of he's being very playful at the beginning of the story and then he's murdering tons of people at the end of the story. You know, and who gets that? Other demons do. Mm-hmm. So, like, when I said at the beginning that you're kind of identifying with him, I think it's because they're trying to establish to you that you as the audience are a demon being told the story.
Sure, that's fair.
You're not you, you're his friend
right.
from down in hell or whatever.
I genuinely thought you were going to say, like, from demon school. No.
No. I mean, maybe.
They're old pals. They're visiting on Thanksgiving break.
You know, if they're having a water cooler chat, they probably don't drink water.
In their business suit and tie, business casual or whatever.
Yeah.
Shirt and tie.
I killed this many people today. How many did you kill?
And just super flippant about it.
Right.
And it really, like, it's like, do you feel guilty? I feel a little guilty, right? Like, you're like, because you, like, read it and you're like, hell yeah, this is great. And then it gets to the end and it's like, oh, they're all dying.
Yeah.
Like, they're all dying. They were super triumphant, right? They had done what they set out to do, which in and of itself was a relatively impossible task. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, not anymore. Sucks to be all of you. And not only are hundreds of you dying per second, and an Eldrazi Titan has been released with no chance of it the network being reformed because it crumbled. But now whatever else Ob Nixilis might be calling power speaking to power, whatever else he might be calling is also coming or rising. So interesting.
Yeah. It's a badass story.
Great.
Because of how it makes you like Ob Nixilis and then hate Ob Nixilis, but the whole time you're still sitting there impressed by how kick-ass he is.
And not for nothing, but it also part of a good story. I mean, we've somewhat complained about it, but this does it the proper way, in my opinion. But this is a story that makes you need to come back next week. Mm-hmm. Because I would be relatively certain, having read this story, that we wouldn't get Ob Nixilis' perspective next week as well. We would get Gideon or Jace or Nissa or some combination thereof, or Kiora or something, but like one of the good guys, right? And you'd see what the aftermath of that is for the other side.
Right. The other perspective of the terrible that he has wrought.
Well, because for Ob Nixilis is so flippant about it.
Right.
Just like, well, hundreds dying every second. Like, yet you could imagine that if that's Gideon's whole persona at this point in these stories is, I am the commander general of these forces, and their successes are my successes, but their failures and their deaths are on me. Right. That's my fault. And so even though Ob Nixilis comes out of nowhere and does this, Gideon's going to blame himself.
Right.
Nissa maybe will blame herself as well because it would be Ob Nixilis.
Right. I mean, these planeswalkers have their morale and their just mental health hinging on the outcome of this. And Nixilis comes in and takes a dump on all of it.
And if I remember what's about to come in the coming weeks, I don't know if it's next week definitively, but in the coming weeks as we review these stories, spoilers, and by that I mean you don't have to click away because I'm not going to give anything away, but it's going to get better or worse before it gets better. It's going to get much worse before it gets better. So, first of all, if this voice acting thing was the first time that you've joined us, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope that you really did enjoy.
Yeah, I hope you thought it was fun, because it was fun for us.
I would love people's feedback. I truly would. And the amount of time between me finishing that voiceover and me sitting here is very short for the fact that my voice is still standing.
Right.
So, you know, knock on wood, that we are still here, and I appreciate that. But, you know, made sure to drink plenty of water in between. But yeah, it was fun for me. I hope people enjoyed it. If you strongly disliked it, again, totally fine. Constructive criticism is important. And so if you were like, look, I like JaAR, I don't like that, keep them separate, right? Maybe that's an option, something like that. Or never do it again, just, it was nice to try it, but don't. Okay. Any thoughts that you have, we would love to hear them. And again, you know, I tried a thing. We'll see. But yeah, hey, don't forget, we will be back next week with a continuation of the reviews of these stories. I can't promise you it'll be another voice acting thing. In fact, I'm relatively certain it won't for a little bit. But depending on the feedback that we get from people will depend on when we come back to doing something similar in the future. And so thank you for any and all feedback that you leave in the comments down below. Yes. It's super important and helps us out a lot. Also, to help you out a lot, if you want to see those things, you should subscribe and make sure that you ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out. We stream twice a week on this channel, Mondays and Fridays. If you're a fan of Magic the Gathering, we stream MTG Arena every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you're a fan of video games in general, first of all, we have a whole channel devoted to it, linked down below, and you should check that out. But also, every Friday, we play video games. What video games, you ask? Well, there are a lot of different options, but this Friday, if you're watching this shortly after it came out, and probably for the foreseeable future for this particular game, but we have been playing through Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2 for the PS2. So one of the old PS2 Dragon Ball Z fighting games. We've played through 4 others in that series, Budokai 1, 2, and 3, and Tenkaichi 1. So now we're at Tenkaichi 2, and we'll do 3 after that, spoilers. But also, so if that's something that seems interesting to you, 8 to 10 p.m. right here on this channel. If you have that bell rung, then you will make sure that you get the notification when we go live or when a new video comes out. Again, subscribing and ringing the bell. Also, other channels down below as well. Definitely check those out. We really do appreciate each and every one of you hanging out with us here because we love this series. We've been doing it for a very long time, and there's a reason for that. Yeah. So, you know, if you want to venture into that, there's probably a playlist somewhere.
Same reason why demons don't go in boats.
It's definitely not even close to that. But still, yes, we've been doing it for a long time. Maybe if I remember and have time to put the playlist, it'll be up there. For all of our JaARs, even if you want to just scroll through them and see. But the reason that we're doing these is because we had read these in the past, these Battle for Zendikar / Oath of the Gatewatch stories. We'd read them in the past, but we never did reviews on them for our JaAR series.
Right.
And we were spurred to doing this because of our returning to Zendikar in Zendikar Rising. So, thank you all so very much for your feedback. Thank you for watching. Hey, if you liked the voice acting thing because you enjoyed hearing Ob Nixilis, and trust me, I'm not trying to say that I am Ob Nixilis or that I could be him. I just mean that you got to, like, be immersed in that story and you want to give feedback on that and you want to see more of that, that's a really great way for you to join us as we show off our...
#Vorthos Pride.
That's right. And thank you so much for doing so. We really do appreciate it. Please continue to stay safe and happy and healthy out there. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we want to keep doing so. And for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.